Greetings, greetings, and greetings again, tribe. Yes, it is actually me, Ra Kalan, on EnergyNMotion again. What? Who would have thought? I would have thought. And I'm so excited to have something for you today. I'm excited because I wasn't going to come back on here till I actually had something I wanted to share. Not because I felt obligated, not because I was worried about it seeming like I was another podcaster who fell off. Let me be another podcaster who fell off. I'll take that, because I found other things that I love to have landed on, and I'm going to intermingle that today. So if you've been following me on 3EnMotion on social media, you've probably noticed that I'm always promoting and pitching and sharing about the More Than Tribe. So what is the More Than Tribe, and why does that have anything to do with EnergyNMotion? It's because the More Than Tribe is EnergyNMotion. So the More Than Tribe is a group that I host every Tuesday from 7 to 8 p.m. It's a subscription-based group where we, as not just human beings, but as healing beings, dive into topics such as self-sabotaging behavior or embarrassment and insecurity. We talk about taking up space. We talk about the fear of being forgotten and what it's like creating meaning in our lives for ourselves instead of just continuing to live the life, the routine style that someone else taught us while we were growing up. This community of about 20 people gets together on a weekly basis and checks in on each other. They ask about each other. They hear from me, I share, but then we have discussions for 30 minutes upwards to an hour sometimes, just because people need to heal and they need to be validated and they need to hear that other people are experiencing the things that they're experiencing. And EnergyNMotion, that is what it has always been about. We have always been here for the validation of the human experience, as well as the elevation past the human experience. And EnergyNMotion created a space for me to get confident in the message I was putting out there, but it also gave me a space to realize I am really hungry for feedback. Feedback and deeper connection. I don't want to just share anymore. I want to hear what I've shared and how it has impacted you. I want to hear how what we're talking about is being put into your daily practices. I want to hear more than what I was hearing just from EnergyNMotion. Because yeah, people would reach out. You would reach out and send me a DM or send me a text message if you are fortunate enough to have my number, and you'd be like, yeah, that episode hit because blah, 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 blah. But wouldn't it be even better if someone could piggyback off of what you were feeling right then in the moment when you heard the message and say, hey, I'm working through that too. This is what I'm doing. We have different approaches to the same situation, and we uphold each other through the ability to move through things differently and still get to the same place of peace we're all after. So in this episode of EnergyNMotion, I'm going to invite you into the tribe. You will just be one of the many participants who received this message last week. And last week, I hit the tribe with a curveball. We've been talking about all different types of feelings and experiences, and last week I hit the tribe with a conversation about death. Because death doesn't give you a heads up that it's coming. Death doesn't give you time to get prepared. Death doesn't care what you were doing before or what your previous plans are. Death just shows the fuck up. And so we talked about death pretty openly. You won't get to hear all the ins and outs, all the sweet vulnerability of the tribe, because that's confidential and I protect my tribe. But you will get to hear my share. And if this brings up any thoughts or feelings for you, I don't want you to feel you have to go through those thoughts or feelings alone. Because you don't. The More Than Tribe is here every Tuesday, 7 to 8 o'clock, waiting for you to subscribe. So in the link that is in the bio, go ahead and click that and start subscribing while you listen to the rest of this amazing share about the big bad boogeyman that is death. Or at least, we thought it was the boogeyman. Enjoy. So to give you a little bit of backstory on why we're talking about this, I've been thinking about death a lot lately. And not like in a sad way, and not specifically thinking about grief necessarily. And I feel like death and grief can be discussed separately, but often aren't. So hear me out. To me, discussing death is the discussion of like what we think death is, while discussing grief more so means diving into the feelings of loss about a person or a situation. And so when I'm talking tonight and when I'm sharing, I'm going to be exploring a little bit of both, but my interest more so being conceptualizing death with you, as well as sharing how my views have grown over time about death, and then also hearing how yours have grown over time and what you think about the subject. Because a lot of times we might just flat be like, I hate death. I hate death. Well, why do you hate it? And it's usually tied to, you know, an experience of loss, an experience of trauma, an experience of being terrified or feeling helpless. And I'm not belittling any of that at all. But I do think that sometimes death gets a bad rap. I think we blame death for things that it's not necessarily fair to blame death for, but also death doesn't mind because death don't give a fuck. Death don't give a fuck. So you can blame death for whatever you want to, and death is willing to be the bad guy. But I'm interested in kind of talking through how I've grown with my experience of death or my awareness of death. And I can't say getting comfortable, but getting less uncomfortable. That would be my honest explanation. So in transparency, this conversation, like I said, it does give me anxiety, and I'm not an expert, right? I'm just a person who has had experiences, who wants to talk to other people who have had experiences. So our actual affirmation, since we're more conceptualizing than doing a whole bunch of like healing spirit work today, though honestly, when we conceptualize, we heal and do the spirit work. Our affirmation for this week is energy cannot be created nor destroyed. And this is the first law of thermodynamics. So the more I talk in this conversation, the more of a nerd I feel like I sound like. But I am here for the nerdy behavior. So I will pop this into the chat box. So yes, energy cannot be created nor destroyed. And that is the first law of thermodynamics. And to give you a little bit of background, because I went and did some more research just so that I could explain it better. The law of conservation of energy, also known as the first law of thermodynamics, states that the energy of a closed system must remain constant. It can neither increase nor decrease without interference from outside. And so to break that down into a little bit more of layman's terms, our universe itself is considered a closed system. So the total amount of energy in existence has always been the same. So the forms that energy takes, however, are constantly changing. So things go from being energy to being physically manifested to being back to energy. Ideas come into fruition and are manifested, then go back to energy and ideas. And things continue to grow and expand in an energetic way, but they don't always look how they physically started out. And so I want to walk you through my conceptualization of death so far up until 28. So we'll take a couple pit stops in my life. And as we do that, I will also copy and paste on in, as usual, our discussion questions so that you can know what I'm going to ask, so that you can know what we're going to talk about, not just what I'm going to ask, what we're going to talk about. So our first discussion question is, what were you taught to think and feel about death? What were you taught to think and feel about death? Not necessarily where your mind might go with this question of, what was the first experience I had with death, though it might be in the same scenario that these thoughts come to mind, but what was the message that your family, your upbringing told you about death and how to feel? Second question is, what is your relationship like with death? What is your relationship like? So is it I never think about it, I try actively not to think about it, or I think about it all the time and me and death are cool, just, give me a heads up? Or what is your relationship like with death? What would you like your relationship with death to be like as well? I think that's another good question. So with those being the things that you can process as I talk, let's go all the way back in my life to really just being 7 years old. So at 7 years old, I became aware, despite the fact that I had goldfish and things like that, and they turned belly up and they were gone, but I didn't think deeply, I didn't think deeply about death. But then at 7, somehow, I don't remember the exact conversation, it dawned on me that my mom would die. Now, I really felt like someone should have like welcomed me into the world with this fact, because I feel like I came into the world loving that woman like crazy unconditionally. So I felt like I should have been met with this news from the beginning. So at 7 years old, I'm feeling hoodwinked and bamboozled about death. I'm like, hold the phone. So this woman that feeds and clothes me and looks after me is going to die. Like, what does that mean? And so at 7 years old, I spent a week to 2 weeks sobbing over a fact that I could not change, and over something that no matter how much I sobbed, I could not change. And at first, my mom was very endeared to me. She was like, oh, honey, it's okay. Because she had lost her mom young. So she probably felt a huge connection to me and not wanting me to feel what she had to feel growing up.
However, after like day 5 of me crying every day, she was getting real tired of me crying all day. Like, it wasn't cute no more. So by a week and a half of me crying about death, my mom's like, girl, if you don't shut up, I'm not dead yet. Why are you crying so much about something neither one of us can change? Cry like this when I die. She really was like fed up about it. And so that's one of my first memories regarding death. Not necessarily some sad, terrible thing. It was sad and terrible. And then the person who I was grieving in advance, as we often do as humans, we grieve in advance the anticipation of losing someone. This person who I was grieving had to tell me to shut the fuck up. And it was very interesting to be told that by the very person who you're afraid of the day they won't be able to tell you that anymore. And I can be honest with you, I still feel many moments in my life where my mother still tells me to shut the fuck up. I feel it. She's been dead for 6 years, but there are moments where I'll be talking and it's like, pipe down, pipe down. And I listen. I listen the same way I did at 7 years old. And so I'm intentionally infusing this conversation with the reality, but also the lightheartedness of this, because I think death gets a bad rap sometimes. So ever since I was little, ever since then, it dawned on me that maybe I'm just having this weird, crazy dream on my deathbed, because I have always been a very dramatic and imaginative child, still a dramatic and imaginative child. But I would have this fantasy, not even fantasy, but it felt like time didn't matter, kind of like what Issa was talking about. And while I'm sitting in the backseat while my parents drive me to soccer practice, am I not also laying on my deathbed thinking back on the things that I wish I had done? Why 7, 8-year-old me was thinking that? Why not? Honestly, why not? And it makes for good conversation now, and it made for good thinking then. But those were the types of thoughts that processed and went through my head. So when I was 9, I actually had more of an experience with death, and I learned that I feared something greater than death. I feared suffering more than I feared death. I feared pain happening to me or to other people much more than I feared not being here. Me and my brother were in 4-H when we were younger. And it's basically a nonprofit that helps kids to be able to like get different skills and certain like trades. And so learning how to sew or to raise animals. And we had chickens. We had chickens that we had in eggs that we had an incubator for, and they hatched. And I had 2 chickens, Samantha and Jonathan. I was very, very much a proud mother hen. But somehow they had started eating, I guess, whatever we had them in the box of, which they weren't supposed to eat, and they got constipated. And literally these 2 chickens in my care were dying of constipation. Now, that's fucked up. That's terrible. It's a hard thing for a kid to process, but it's also just like, I'm looking back now like, dang, that's a real hard way to go. Just like, I would hate to die due to being constipated, but that's a thing. And so I learned about having to watch this chick go through this because we couldn't do anything. I don't think my parents wanted to scare me and like go and cut its head off, but it dawned on me, and I started having that thought of, I would rather it be dead. I would rather it be dead than feel what it's feeling right now. It's squirming, it looks uncomfortable. I would rather it to be dead. And when that chick passed, the last one, Jonathan went pretty quickly. Samantha hung on far too long. When that last one passed, I was relieved. And that's when I really knew that I felt something different about suffering versus death, that death could offer a relief to people, to those things that were afraid of it happening once it did happen, just because of the traumatic experience of dying. Death could be a relief. And that was not something that before then it hadn't really dawned on me. It just seemed like death was something that stole people away. Even with how my mom and my parents and my family talked about death, they didn't talk about it a lot, but they didn't hide it. It wasn't a household where they didn't feel comfortable to share about like, oh, so-and-so passed away, and that means that they're gone and their body will, decompose. Like, they weren't shy of it, but it wasn't a huge topic. Something interesting I found out after my mom passed away, though, is that, little to my understanding, she had a huge obsession with death. Like, her whole life, she had a huge obsession. She journaled about it, apparently. My father confided in me after she passed away. So I wonder if I inherited this fascination with death. Just off the top of my head, a thought that I thought. But at 9 years old, realizing that suffering was more frightening to me than death was, is what kind of led me to starting to be fascinated with taking a closer look or another look at death. So we've talked about me at 7, we've talked about me at about 9, so let's bump me up to 12 years old here. I got weirdly fascinated with death in my like own awareness of myself. Like I started trying to see if I could feel anything else in here, inside myself, that would make me feel like I could leave. Like the thing that is me could leave out of here. I don't know if y'all have ever thought thoughts like that, but that's why I'm bringing this conversation up, because I'm very interested to know if you have. I wondered, this is me. And I would do this thing where I would look at my hand. And if you've ever looked at your hand for a while, sometimes you'll notice like a part of your hand, a vein will move, a finger will twitch, and you know you didn't do that. And so you start to observe yourself as a body that does things on its own, that you don't have to tell yourself to breathe every couple of seconds, the fact that you don't tell your digestive system to do this or to do that. I became very fascinated with the mechanics of the body. And quite honestly, I became fascinated with a thing called decomposition. So at 12 years old, I probably was really creepy. I was also going through a golf phase, but I was very interested in how long does it take to no longer look the way you look right now? How long does it take? You know, when do you stop holding this form, and when do you get bloated, and when do you turn colors, and when do you do this? When do you ooze? When do you do that? It was probably terribly creepy for my parents. I can only imagine how creeped out, especially with my mom having had to deal with me at 7. I'm sure she was just like, this child is driving me nuts at this point. But at the same time, I was open to talking about it. Didn't know what I thought about it all yet. I definitely had a deeper interest in death than anybody else I knew. But I knew that just like I was becoming aware of myself as a sexual being in my early teenage years, and I was interested in what the human body looked like in an intimate way, in a sexual way, I was also aware of the other way that I don't often see people expressing themselves that I'm interested in is in a dead way. You don't really see dead people, just like you don't really see naked people. So my curiosity led me to find out, what do naked people look like, and what does death look like? So then I evolved to being about, 18 years old. And don't let all of this curiosity with death like make you think that I actually was getting to have the exposure or having a lot of experiences with death. It wasn't that many experiences yet. So I was able to be curious without being deeply impacted yet. I had loved ones pass away, but there was no one who was so close to me that it scared me or that it wounded me. It might startle me, but it didn't wound me the way that certain losses and certain loved ones wound you when they transition. So at 18, I've had a dog at this point for 13 years. I got this dog, I want to say a couple years after the chicks passed, or right before the chicks passed. And so that was probably even more of the reason I was upset about the chickens, because I was like, dang, this is a reflection of someday what will happen to Johnny. So Johnny was my dog. If y'all follow me on Instagram, y'all understand that Victoria, Queen of Shadows, the dog I have now, holds my heart, just undeniably so. But before Victoria, before Vicky, there was Johnny. And Johnny was my roll dog. And it was the terribly sad situation of you grow up with this dog and then you go off to college and then your parents keep the dog and the dog's life has to expire at some point, and you still remember the dog the way the dog was when you were younger, and you didn't recognize just how much time you were missing with him as you were growing up and getting into liking different people or getting a job after work. You didn't realize the time you were losing with your pet. And so my mom contacts me and lets me know, like, hey, Johnny can't really get up and walk anymore. So just want you to be aware of that. And so I'm very heightened to that type of conversation. It's one thing if she's like, hey, I had to give him some aspirin, but to literally say, like, he's not getting up anymore, it's like, okay, so what do we need to do? I realized about myself when it came to death, I become very calm and very effective and productive in moments when faced with death. I don't get scattered the way that I might as soon after the situation happens. I'll just explode into feelings. But when confronted with it, I feel a strange quiet, a strange calm of, okay, clarity, this is what needs to be done. So I start calling around, finding out where is the most humane, safe place to take your pet to be put down. And it's not that I'm not aware that this is the dog that I've had since I was 5 or 6 years old. It's not that I'm not aware that, that time that me and my dog fought a Rottweiler to protect each other. Like, it's not that I'm not aware that this is the same dog that this is happening to. However, I'm also aware that this is happening. It's not a if, it's not a I can't bargain my way out of it. This is happening. And so I want it to happen the best way it can happen. And also keep in mind from earlier in my story, I don't like suffering. So as soon as I hear that suffering is happening, I know I need to go into action mode. I know that I need to do something to keep what I'm actually afraid of, which is pain, which is suffering. I can't stop death. But in some capacity, maybe if I can make it as humane a death as possible, then suffering can be ended. And that to me was better. So I come home after talking to my mom the following day, and we found a good place about 15 minutes from where my mom lived, and we were going to take Johnny there to be put down. We found out once we got there that you couldn't, it costs money to put your pet down. They didn't say that on the phone. That's weird, right? They charge you to take your loved one. They do. And the most ironic thing was that me and my mom, we didn't have money. We were so emotional when we got into the car and put Johnny into the car and we left. We didn't bring purses. We just sobbed our way there 15 minutes and then had to honestly sob our way home with him still in the back seat. And we got home and my mom is Swedish. So she was like, maybe this is a sign. Maybe this means that we're not supposed to do it. And I took him out of the car and I put him on the ground. He still couldn't walk. And I said, no, mama, it just is a sign that we need to get our money. And she was devastated. She really wanted this to be a sign that we didn't have to do it. But it didn't change the fact that I still felt this urge from suffering, from fear of suffering, to make sure that whatever was most peaceful happened. And so I let my dog go that day. And I was devastated. I was devastated after the fact, especially not getting to be there with him at the time of it happening. I had a beautiful exchange with the woman who was taking him from me. I handed her to him. She was this tiny, tiny, tiny white girl. And he was heavy. He had gotten very heavy over the years, but her arms didn't shake when she grabbed him. And something about that told me a lot about her understanding of what I needed from her in the situation and how sturdy I needed her to be, not just for me, but for him. And she said, I would not leave him until he's gone. He'll have to leave me. I won't leave him. And I was like, okay, cool. And so even though this shitty, terrible situation is happening, there's still this awareness of keptness of if this is inevitable, and if this has to happen, and if I have to be okay with this happening, be gentle with him. And I've always been given back grace when I've asked the universe, let it be gentle with them. Even when it doesn't look gentle, let it take my loved one with ease and with gentleness, and let it be quick. So that was my experience with death at 18. And that was really a very close experience because I loved that damn dog. I did. Even though I had grown up and gotten other interests, I loved that damn dog. So let's fast forward all the way to 22. And this time, the loved one passing away is my mom. And you couldn't have told me from 7 years old all the way up until then that when someone says, oh, come to the hospital, your mom is in the hospital, that I wasn't immediately just going to like transcend right then. Like, let me get to heaven. If there is a heaven, let me get there before she do so I can greet her because I can't be down here without her. I was one of those kids. But when I tell you that that's not who I was. I thought that's who I was. I thought I was the daughter that must go with her mother. I thought I was the daughter who would fall apart when her mother died. I thought that's who I was because of how other people who loved their moms a lot grieved their mothers. I thought I was that person because I knew how much I love my mother. So how could I not fall apart if she passes away? When she passes away. When my mom was passing away, I had a very clear awareness that this is not by accident. I had a very clear awareness that while I was helpless in this situation, I was not hopeless. I was not abandoned, even though I felt like I was being left by something that I could not replace if I ever tried. But at the same time, I also recognized I was being given something that I could not put a price on either. And it's a hard thing to explain when your greatest fear does happen, and then you're on the other side of it, and you still find joy. It feels very confusing. It feels surreal, like you're feeling something you don't deserve to feel, like you're feeling something you shouldn't be feeling, but there's no right feeling about death. My mom, as weird as me and her both were, when she started, as she got older and she'd go to her siblings' funerals, she would stand beside the casket as they lowered it and she would applaud. She would applaud. As bizarre as that is, it tells you a little bit about how bizarre I am. She would sit there and tell her sister, good job, Sylvia. good job, you did it, girl. Like she would give that. And other people would be upset and angry that she would make such a mockery. But who's telling who to grieve in a certain way? It's a celebration for some people and it's a mourning process for others. But I come somewhere in the middle of being very aware of how uncomfortable, how terrifying having to rebuild the foundation under your feet is when you think about death. But I also recognize that I know so little about it. I've had such little experience, and the experience I have had has been very up close and personal. I was with my mom when she was passing, so between, the childhood of watching the suffering there and then coming all the way to adulthood and watching that experience, which was very traumatic, and I'm thankful that memory has been kind enough to blur and soften some of the images, but I still have some of the others, and I can tell you I regret nothing. I regret nothing. There was a brief moment I thought about being angry that I had to watch my mother die. And then I thought, what an honor, what an intimate honor. It sounds weird, I know, but I wouldn't have wanted anybody else there with her than me. And the story continues to evolve further, and there will be another night. And I meant to say this earlier. With us focusing more so on death and conceptualizing death together, I am not ignoring grief. I'm specifically not going into the heart-wrenching aspects of my story because I don't want us to get caught up in the grief of it yet. I am very interested to have a conversation specifically talking about grief, not just grief of losing a loved one to death, but grief in general, because we're grieving a lot of things if we're real about it. But I think that conversation is something that should be held and have a night of its own, and maybe even a night in person. This will not be the only time we talk about death, and it won't be the only time we talk about death and grief. I think this is a subject that we will revisit from time to time as our lives expand, as we encounter death, as we have thoughts and dreams and fears. So the reason why I felt appropriate to go ahead and bring this in today is because, one, as we know, death waits for no man or woman. It pops up when you least expect it, so why not have it pop up in here when it's safe to have these conversations, and so that we all kind of know how we feel about death so that we can be supportive for each other when we are confronted with its inevitable truth. So now I want to open up the floor to talk with you about how you've experienced death in your life when it comes to what were you taught? Were you taught to be afraid? Were you taught to embrace it? And what's your relationship with death like now? So please share.
So this is the point in the More Than Tribe where we break out into discussion. We start having conversations. I have specific questions that I ask each week that are different, that completely support what this conversation, what the share was about in the first place. And usually our discussion portion lasts for about 30 minutes, 30 to 35 minutes. But this discussion lasted about 45 minutes to an hour because people really needed to share their heart, share their experience, share their emotions over death and how overwhelming of a subject it is, but also how relatable it is and inescapable. So if you are anything like us and you have so many thoughts, so many opinions, so many emotions and feelings and experiences surrounding this conversation, don't try to sift through it alone. The More Than Tribe is simply $27 a month. Not a week, $27 a month, so that you can show up every Tuesday, not just for your tribe, which you will now have, but for yourself, so that you can see the processing that you are putting into practice, the shifts that you are putting into your life, and also have like a group of cheerleaders who understand the growth you're going through, and they're excited for all the shifts you're making instead of calling you brand new for changing. We are not just human beings here. We are healing beings in this tribe. So I'm going to give y'all a little extra something. We don't necessarily do take a beats in the More Than Tribe. That's more of an energy and motion thing. But because I love you and I've missed you, I'm going to share what I call the speaking of life that I do at the end of every tribe meeting. This is a little abstract, but it's my opportunity to share what spirit uses me as a vessel to communicate to everybody else. Sometimes it has something to do directly with what we talked about in that conversation that night. Other times it's something completely different, but it still needed to be shared because someone needed to hear it. So I don't know who needs to hear this, but I'm going to go ahead and add this speaking of life over energy and motion as well. And I'm not going to say goodbye after, because who needs a goodbye? You'll be hearing from me again soon whenever you're supposed to, whether that's next Tuesday because you have joined the tribe, or whenever the next time I drop an Energy in Motion episode is. What I need you to understand, though, is no matter how long it takes for you to hear my beautiful, sultry, warm voice again, Energy in Motion family, you get to feel whatever it is you need to feel. And you will always, always deserve to heal. It still just feels so good to say that. Oh, peace and enjoy.
I am the forgotten one who does not mind being forgotten. Far beyond our understanding of what matters and what does not matter, I exist, both mattering and not mattering simultaneously. There's a level of contentment in this space of being that human beings forget. We strive as human beings to be the result, to be an outcome, instead of relishing in what we are. We blatantly miss all of the proper signs to direct us to our true selves in search of signs that validate other people's expectations. We even grieve according to other people's comfort levels. We get uncomfortable at challenging things we have been believing, including our existence, because others do not have the answers that we ourselves have. It is okay to be forgotten when you extend beyond time, when you extend and expand beyond memory. Being forgotten matters not. The physical ache I recognize human beings experiencing is strong, it is palpable, but it too is a manifestation of choices. There is no good nor bad to me. There just is. And in this place of being and isness that I have spoken of, that level of contentment I speak of, is a place that no anxiety lives, is a place that no ache resides. There is nothing to rush off to do. There is nothing to regret not doing. There just is. And you live in this place too. We live in this place. We are this place. And when we get overwhelmed with the surface stimulation, we can sink back into ourselves and be. No matter what is scaring us on the outside, we can sink into ourselves and be. And know that it is safe for us in here. Because just as dark as it might seem, it is beaming with nooks and crannies worth exploring, limitless, expansive space worth exploring that has answers that others could never provide for us. We are safe, as there is nothing to fear other than what we create to fear ourselves. Give thanks. Give thanks.